To our next guest, Deiric McCann from Genos International. I'm sure that you'll have had a chance to talk to the team who are outside with their booth, really happy to go through what they've been discussing and working on. We have talked an awful lot about leadership today. Salespeople is the key. All of us appear to be trying to sell something at all points, but how do you do it? How do you make a success of that? And how can we move that forward for the future? There's one man who knows, and it's Deiric.
Okay, my father was born in 1932, and the best piece of wisdom he had for me is never stand between people and alcohol, okay? And here I stand. Scary, really scary. Do me a favor, please stand up. Okay, put your hand on your heart. Turn around and face the back of the room. Now, please be careful of the furniture, but take one step forward. Great, thank you very much. So you can sit down, your part is done, my part begins. We live in a world of social media, and all day long you guys have been tweeting and Facebooking and LinkedIning and all those sorts of things. And now what you can do when you next time, and for the last time, when you tweet, you can say, Deiric McCann touched our hearts. He got us on our feet. He turned us around and he got us moving forward. So thank you very much for the good press in advance. This is me. All I want to tell you about this is that I love what I do, and that is bring EI and mindfulness together in a way that gets measurable bottom line results for organizations. And I do this for this organization, Genos. Genos, in dog years, emotional intelligence years, is very, very old. It's been around since 2002, where it was founded in Sydney, Australia. And since then, we've certified about 7,500 people as practitioners who work in organizations specifically focused on generating bottom line results for their organizations by making their people more practically emotionally intelligent. An old boss of mine used to say, nothing happens until somebody sells something. And it's for that reason that most organizations in the world spend more on the sales function than anything else. If you listen to training development or in trainingindustry.com, they'll tell you that the global sales industry for training is worth about $2.5 billion. For some reason, HBR rates it as about 6 times that. The stats tell us that we spend about $1 trillion US. In the US, that's 12 zeros. $1 trillion on recruiting, on training, on maintaining, on commissioning our salespeople. So we spend a lot of money on this, and most of it is based upon sales process. It's a very simple idea. If you look at what the best salespeople do, and you can grab it down on paper and create a process from it, and then polish it up a little bit, well, then you could train anybody to repeat that when they walk in front of a client, right? And so pretty much all of the sales training that we're exposed to now is process-oriented. It's about, a friend of mine used to call it pigs into sausages. It's about putting the client or the prospect on this journey where you process them through a sales process. And by the way, this is a real sales process that I lifted off the web. Most of them are not quite as intricate as that. And despite the fact that this stuff works, and you know what? Somebody who has been trained using good conventional sales training will get better results than somebody who hasn't. But despite the fact that so much is spent on this sort of sales training, we still have a problem. And that problem is that it doesn't do anything to change the distribution of performance across our sales teams. If you've 10 salespeople, chances are, not chances are, stats predict 2 of them will be bottom performers, 6 of them will be average. Now, I don't know if you remember back to school, if your teacher called you in and said you're absolutely average, you didn't say, wow, wait till I tell my folks, okay? And then at the top end, you had 2 top performers. Now, when I talk to sales leaders, they'll very frequently say, I wish I had that distribution. But even if they had that distribution, they should be depressed because the stats suggests that the difference in performance between the bottom performers and the average is about 32%. And the difference in performance between the average and the top performers is 32%. So there's a gap between those two pairs of salespeople at the top and the bottom of the team of about 64%. Now, if Martin or any psychometricians or any other mathematicians are in the audience, you're saying, Deiric, you really can't just add those 32s together and get 64. The number's actually bigger than that. Yeah, but this is easier to deal with. The gap at a minimum is huge. And in fact, in his second book, Daniel Goleman said that it's actually worse than that. He said, top performing sales guys, or people, are 12 times more productive than those at the bottom and 85% more productive than the average performer. So you must wonder why. And if you're fueling salespeople and you're training salespeople, you have to wonder why that is. And that's what I want to explore with you a little bit today. To get that started, let me ask you just to call out maybe 2 or 3 words that you think come into your people's minds when they think of the character of salespeople. Just call out a couple of words. Driven, okay, good. Pushy. Which? Sneaky. Okay, one more. Proactive. You know, when there's a nice mixture in there, you got pushy, you got sneaky, you got proactive, you got driven. And if we had time, I'd do a live poll. I did it about 10 days ago, and this is what I got. And sometimes the big words that come out are untrustworthy, sneaky, slimy, slippery. And you get some of the big words like driven, like extrovert, ambitious, and so on and so forth. But the core thing that comes up when you talked to people about salespeople is that most people just do not trust them. And all of the studies show that time after time, despite the fact that there are perfectly good, trustworthy salespeople in the world. This study by HubSpot from just a couple of years ago put salespeople just 2 or 3 percentage points above lobbyists and politicians. God help us. Okay? And for the marketing people in the room, don't get too smug. You'll notice that you're kind of down there. So there's something going on with that makes us mistrustful and leery and cautious about salespeople. And that's what I want to explore with you today. What is that, and what can we do to change that? Now, I'm going to give you a quick 90-second observation test. Boring piece of video. I just want you to watch it, and I'll ask you some questions at the end. Okay, if you jumped, you now know what the limbic system, the reptile brain, is for. It's for helping you to deal with threats to your well-being. So it's the part of your brain that when you get a fright, stimulates you to lift off the chair like that and either go running for the door or running towards the guy who made the noise and beat him up. Okay? So the limbic system, and several people have referred to it today, is the emotional brain. If you were to take a pen and stick it into your ear, don't do it at home, and take another one, stick it into your eye. Where they cross is at the smoke alarm of the brain, and there's one on each side. You've heard of it, it's called the amygdala. Okay? And it's quite simply designed to parse all of the input coming from the outside world and say, does this pose a threat? And if it does, get me out of Dodge before the thinking brain engages. Absolutely everything that you experience as a stimulus is filtered through that emotional brain. And it is filtered into just 2 simple categories. It's binary. It's either a threat and it's bad, or it's a reward and it's good. And it understands nothing more than that. So the amygdala, the emotional brain, is just a simple binary machine. Now, if you get triggered into a danger or a threat response, it has a very distinct impact upon the way you start to show up from that point forward. Let me ask you, how many people here have ever met somebody for the first time and for no good reason, you just don't like them? Yeah? Okay. And what about how many people have ever met somebody for the first time and for some reason you like them and you just think, that's a really lovely person, right? That's your emotional brain at work. And God knows why you respond positively to some and negatively to others. It's likely that it's some mirror of some past experience or some past emotional experience that is reflected into the current place or into the current time. But here's the key thing. If you're a salesperson, you cannot afford to go there. Because what we do when we get triggered into that threat response is we disengage, we pull away, we distance ourselves. Now, when a salesperson we don't like walks into the room, we don't run. We can't run physically, it's just not socially acceptable. So what we do is we start to bring down the barriers and we start to reverse off a little bit and we start to pull away from them. So we become evasive, we become guarded, we become very, very careful of the way we interact with them. And that signal, which is passed through that emotional brain, like that scare you got a moment ago, that gets just a fraction of a second later to the thinking brain and says, frickin' Paddy, I hate them, the way you frightened me like that. There was no need to run, there's no threat whatsoever. Got to the thinking brain, it works it out. But when it gets there, it has changed at that point the way that you are showing up to that person. It affects your feelings, it affects the behaviors that you demonstrate, the decisions you make, and the extent to which you engage. A salesperson walks into a room and somebody is triggered into that threat place, and then it doesn't matter what that person does from that point forward, from a logical or rational point of view, to express the superiority of the product, it's over. On the other hand, if somebody triggers you into that reward place, that person whom you meet for the first time, whom you feel, oh, I like this person, well then what happens right away is your body is flooded with much more friendly chemicals. So you're flooded with oxytocin or bonding chemicals, so you become a little bit more engaged, a little bit more connected, and a little bit more open. And that automatically has an influence on the things that you think, the decisions that you make, the way you show up, and the extent to which you engage. So one of the challenges clearly is, in a world where 3% of people express trust in salespeople, is that somehow we are managing to trigger people into that threat response. So the way you trigger people into a threat response is by trying to sell to them. If they feel that they are being manipulated, being conned, being sold to, being processed, if you've ever stood in front of somebody who treated you like as I say, a pig entering a sausage factory, that you were just part of a process and you knew you were on the production line, well, then you start to close that down. But if you meet somebody who engenders trust, gives you a sense of certainty, gives you a sense that they're on your side, that they'll cover your behind, that they'll make sure that you're not exposed to risk, well, then you get triggered more into that positive state of mind. And that's why when we talk about the limbic system or the reptile brain, we call it the buying brain. Because at the end of the day, we are emotional creatures who think, as somebody said earlier today, as opposed to thinking people who have emotions. All of our buying decisions are made in the limbic system, are made in the emotional brain. We decide whether we like something, and then we justify it up here. And in a complex interaction, like a sales situation, that brain chemistry, that brain interaction from all of the parties is very, very complex and really needs to be understood and managed. Here we've got a sales team, and the lady on the left-hand side, not a sales team, a sales presentation. The lady on the left-hand side is making a presentation to this team of people. How would you say it's going? How many people think it's going pretty well? Yeah, I mean, it's lovely. The body language is super. They're all sort of engaged, they're smiling. And she looks pretty happy and satisfied with herself. What you don't see in that picture is Mary. And Mary's just standing slightly outside the group. What do you think Mary's reaction is to this sales presentation? Is she convinced? Hell no. Okay? I mean, could she be any clearer? Now, look at the salesperson. She obviously can't see Mary because she wouldn't be smiling all over her face like that. Well, you know what? Yes, she does. She's watching Mary like a hawk. And when I say like a hawk, I use that expression advisedly because the reptile brain is scanning all of the time for threats. And just like the shadow of a hawk appearing over your ancient reptilian ancestors, Mary's standing off to one side with that, impress me, sort of look on her face, has got that salesperson triggered. So her mind right now is flying. And it's running through one of three possibilities: fight, flight, or freeze. Now, freeze doesn't work very well in sales situations, although you do get people get that sort of stage fright type of thing. So what you're more likely to get is either salespeople triggered into a fight response or a flight response. And here's how you know a salesperson being triggered into it. Lots of different ways of looking at it. First off, they get louder and they get faster. Okay? When they're triggered into that, they start to talk an awful lot faster, and they try to talk you down. They become overly defensive to the point of pushiness or aggression. You can get that moving up physically, moving in close. Tone becomes short and sharp and caustic. So I love well, why are you so much more expensive than your competitors? Well, really, do you want a Fiesta or do you want a Mercedes? You know? So, and there's nothing quite as awful as seeing a salesperson trying too hard, okay? And the reality is, in that situation, unless they've learned to understand what's going on and to work with that, that is outside of their control, and everything they know about what they should do in that moment is gone. The logical process falls away. They could, of course, fall into a flight response. Flight response is you just get a little bit quieter, maybe take offense, maybe ignore Mary. And this is a classic. You see it with young sales folks, you see it with older sales folks, but you see it with cubs, as my old sales manager would have called them, where they ignore the threat in the room and just focus on the friendlies, the ones where it's working. And that just simply doesn't work. There's the other one, which is they give away the shop. You know, do you think you could do this for 20%, Jess? Oh, hell yes, absolutely I could. No problem whatsoever. Or they agree to pointless proposals. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands, but if you're in business, you have put out an awful lot more pointless proposals than you've closed business. Because people often use pointless proposals just to get rid of you when they're feeling triggered. So somebody who's in a flight response like that, after that single syllable conversation, send me a proposal. Oh yeah, absolutely delighted to. I'll get that out to you right away. Can't wait to get outside the door. Either way, whatever happens to happen, if a salesperson walks into that room and they don't understand the way they're wired, and all they understand is how to roll out a set of process steps, well then they're always going to be open to being victims of this sort of threat. But it's more complex than that. It's more complex than that because there's somebody else in the room. There's the people you're selling to. And prospects and clients get triggered too. Now, if you were to use, and a couple of people have spoken about this, if you were trained so that you could drive the gap a little bit wider between the stimulus and the response. And Patrick this morning referred in his first session to Viktor Frankl. You know, between the stimulus and the response, there's a gap. And if he was able to make that a little bit wider, I think Martin made reference to that as well. If he was able to see what's going on and say, hey, this is broken, and turn and say, hey, Mary, I appreciate you being here. I get a sense that something's not quite working too well. Where would you like us to go from here? It's a very different outcome to those two other strategies. But as I say, prospects also get triggered. And the thing that triggers you and I is being sold to. There's nothing that gets our backs up quicker. Because when a prospect or a client walks into a room, the chances are, and they know this, that they know less about buying than the person in front of them knows about selling. Because most salespeople have been trained to within an inch of their lives on how to separate you from your money, okay? That's what the process is all about. And so sitting there, they know that. So before you come in, they're already slightly triggered. You come in and you start using some of the classic language. Now, I'm exaggerating for effect, but not by much. So you use stuff like, are you thinking to make a change? Are you having problems with your current vendor? Right away, that's this guy wants to take my money. This guy is here to do it. It's putting me into a threat footing because he's here to take either my hard-earned money or the budget which my boss gave me to protect. Or the other one, this is lovely, and this is such a classic sales question. If we are able to deal with this issue, would you be ready to take the next step? Salespeople call it a trial close. And all it does is it closes down prospects, okay? If it's not timed for the right time. The other classic is, what's your budget for this proposal? Now, I worked for a couple of years in the United States in a sales position, and it was standard to ask people, what's your budget for this proposal? And they would tell you. And then I came back home to Ireland, and the first person I asked, what's your budget for this proposal? It was like I asked them about his sex life. It's like you're asking for really, really personal info. What do you mean, what's my budget for this? That's private. Okay? So there are lots of ways that we can trigger them. Who else will need to get involved if we move ahead? And then what the salespeople call the alternative choice close. Would you like that in red or blue? But the bottom line is that in any sales interaction, there are two people who at the end of the day are emotional animals that think. And they are very easily triggered into fight or flight. Now, we can't do anything whatsoever about our customers, but we can do something about ourselves. Now, when people ask me in a bar over a beer, what is emotional intelligence? You can't go into the long-winded psychometric assessment type description. So what I tell them is the way you show up determines the way people feel. Let me ask you, do you know anybody who, when they walk in the room, sucks the energy, the positivity, and the general life out of the room? Okay? Yeah. The way you show up determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they can engage. And I don't even mean will engage, I mean can engage. If you are triggered and you're stressed, you're in fight or flight, it doesn't matter that the person sitting across from you has the best offering in the space that you're looking for, you cannot engage with them. And the extent to which somebody engages with you determines pretty much everything about the outcome of that. And that's whether it's your kids, your wife, your lover, your clients, anybody you interact with, the way you show up or the way you behave determines the way people feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they can engage, and the extent to which they can engage pretty much determines the outcome of that relationship. So if you look at sales situations, emotional intelligence is working with the two emotional brains that are at that table, yours and the prospect's. It's about, particularly on the part of the salesperson, recognizing your emotions and those of your prospects and clients. So noticing when Mary is looking away that your heart's beating a little bit faster, that you're probably full of cortisol, that the hair is standing up on the back of your neck and you're thinking about your next mortgage payment. Recognizing that that's going on, understanding what has triggered that, and then understanding the impact that it's having on yourself and others, and then making a decision. What do I do about that? And unless you send salespeople in equipped with the skills when they hit one of those emotional potholes to be able to draw that gap, Frankel's gap between the stimulus and the response, and to manage that situation, well, then we'll always have that distribution of sales performance. Because most salespeople in medium or small, medium, up to large organizations have been trained to within an inch of their lives on what to do. They know exactly what steps they should be going through, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to show up. And the stats have been saying this for years. They haven't necessarily been mentioning emotional intelligence, but for years and years and years, all of the big studies come out and they say the way salespeople show up determines loyalty, determines success, and determines the extent to which we turn people off. The way we behave determines the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they get engaged, and the extent to which they engage determines the outcome of that engagement or that relationship. Even as long ago as Dan Goleman's second book, he identified this. And he said 2/3 of the difference between those top performing and those average performing folks is due to emotional intelligence, the way you show up. Now, you don't need to read that book. You don't need to see those stats. You instinctively, as I'm talking to you, you know this. You know what it feels like to be assaulted, and it does feel like an assault, by a salesperson who has no emotional intelligence. So let me share with you what we've learned about what you need to do to educate salespeople to be more emotionally intelligent, so that you can take away, and I'll give you the 4 things that I think you really need to do to raise the emotional intelligence of salespeople. First thing you have to work on is their self-awareness. Because when they walk into the room, you cannot have the reaction that we spoke about with the first person. Do you know anybody who, when they walk into the room, drops the temperature 3 degrees, sucks the energy and the enthusiasm out of it? They have to have an authentic presence that makes people feel comfortable, triggers them into that reward state. And when they're not there, and when they are feeling triggered themselves, they have to notice. I'll tell you how you do that in a moment. Second thing is, there's a second party in that room. You have to develop the awareness they have of others. And you have to wean them off the idea that they will get answers to every question they ask, which are totally honest, and that they'll be told when there's an impediment there. They have to learn to listen with their whole selves to identify those impediments or those key concerns, whether they've been verbalized or not. The third thing, and Martin referred to it a few moments ago, and the research for this is just so compelling, is you have to train them to connect. You have to train them to develop empathy and compassion of a genuine kind that makes them want to be there with that person, helping them to get the best outcome they can from that relationship. So you have to help develop their compassion, their curiosity, and concern. And then you have to keep them alive long enough to make a return on the investment you make on training them. And one of the really disturbing things right now, in a world where we talk a lot about resilience and anxiety and stress and burnout, the sales profession is the single most deadly of all the professions. People are dying with their boots on from the level of stress in selling. So you have to train them. How do I deal with rejection? How do I deal with being pushed back? Our 2 actor friends earlier on said that they had to learn to deal with constant rejection. Think of salespeople. A salesperson who gets a 2 in 10 hit rate is probably doing pretty well. In some industries, they're doing really, really well. Okay? The way we do this, because you can't teach change in the classroom. You can show somebody, here's what it is to be self-aware. You can show somebody, here's what it is to have awareness of others. You can show somebody, here's what it is to have empathy. But you can't change their behaviors in 2 days. You can't change their behaviors in 6 individual sessions. You have to really work with them over a long period of time to help that happen. The way we do it is we use techniques like classic mindful breath focus just to help people become more aware of what's going on in their body. Give them the capacity to notice emotions as they arise, to name them, and then to decide what they're going to do about them. With awareness of others, we train people in something that's called use of self, or in other words, how to basically open up empathetically and to be able to listen for what people are feeling as well as what people are saying. We train them also to open up as more compassionate human beings, because there is a certain amount of danger in unfettered empathy. So we train them using compassion training to be able to connect more effectively with people. And then finally, we train them in something called stop and drop, which is a simple technique for managing emotions in the moment. It takes weeks to do it. When we get people in for 2 days or for 4 half-day sessions, we then have to spend 6 or 8 weeks with them, day by day, in contact with them through the email, through monthly check-ins, to help them make that behavior change. Did anybody not get one of these? Okay. When you're leaving, on the counter outside, you'll see that we have something that look like chocolate coins. They're not chocolate, don't try to bite them, okay? And they are a simple little physical cue that we use at the end of programs. And we've taught people the various practices that we get them to build into their lives to create behavior change. We've given them this small physical cue. And the way it works, I'll give you the gentleman's version, and the ladies can work out. You'll understand why in a moment, what the ladies' version looks like for you. When I get up in the morning, I go to my bedstand, and I take my keys, I take whatever money was in my pocket, whatever else that I want to take away from the day, and that's on the bedstand. Whoa. And as I'm picking it up, I know that on one side of that, it says, what are your intentions for today? How do you plan to show up? What is it will make this day a good day for you? So I know at least as I put that into my pocket, just by touching it, I have a mindful moment. On the other side of the coin, you'll see, what are you grateful for today? As you're unpacking it at the end of the day and you're putting it back on the bedstand, well, then it's just momentary. What am I grateful for today? Now, I know what some of you, I can see the bubbles over your head. You're thinking there are some freaking days when there's nothing much to be grateful for. And there are weeks when that go by sometimes. And as I'm putting that onto my bedstand, I think Tommy. And Tommy is my 2.5-year-old grandson. And if nothing else is good in the world, there's him. And then there's my wife, and then there's my kids. And then somehow, once you tune into one, you find that they're all chained together. Simple, simple little technique. And we've run this at the end of a lot of our programs, and we get a lot of comments back on the efficacy of that simple, simple technique. So make sure you pick one up on the way out. But where most of the conversation, I think today, and most of the conversation in the research talks around emotional intelligence applied to leadership, there's now an emerging body that is talking about it around sales. And that's logical, because there is no place where emotional intelligence is more important than when one person sits down with another to try and separate them from their money. A couple of years ago, we did a study with Sanofi Aventis where we split a team of a couple of hundred salespeople doing pretty much the same job into two parts. One part was used as a control. The other went through an assessment and a 6-week emotional intelligence development program. At the end of a 6-month period, there was an average of about 12% increase for those people who went through the EI program. And that's simply because as they're walking in, they're aware of the need to show up in a way that triggers people into where they need them to be triggered. We're working on one in Australia right now with News Corp, and some of the early, it's an ongoing project, but some of the early results show that those folks who have very high scores on REI assessments, it's very heavily correlated with superior sales performance. Now, you don't need to see the stats to know that's the case, because your intuition tells you that. And yet, the majority of organizations we go into, as I say, people are trained to within an inch of their lives on process selling, and they should be. This is not a substitute, it's an augmentation. It's an add-on, it's an additional training. Recently, over the last couple of months, we delivered a program to the biggest, or one of the biggest companies you never heard of. It's a $5 billion company called Givaudan. And you interact with them every day in your soaps, in your washing up liquids, in a lot of the foods that you eat. And they just make scents and flavors. And they gave us 17 of the senior sales guys. And they said, we're giving you these guys because they're going to be the most resistant. If you can bring them on side, you're okay. And we got phenomenal feedback because salespeople know there's something missing. And when they see it, they instinctively know it. So don't be frightened off by the often resistant front that salespeople put on. Just to give you one example of the sort of feedback that we got back, said in 12 years with Givaudan, this is the best sales training I've had by far. Now don't get me wrong, unless they understood their products, unless they understood how to do their jobs, they wouldn't be getting the results. But this augments and gives them something that's a little bit extra. So my question to you is, are you training your salespeople to be emotionally intelligent? And if not, why? Because, as I said at the outset, nothing happens until somebody sells something. So thank you very much.